Well, the whole country to a small dog. I'm not sure that the UK would be pleased with that, but that's small dogs for you. They have it's probably I trod on the small dog's Achilles heel there.
Yeah, it's the Napoleon complex. Although apparently he was actually like of average height at the time.
Well, yeah, and France is huge, so he was just the smallest man in France. But I mean, what? But it's just a thing. I mean, I feel like small people can actually really embrace that, like large people can embrace it. But if people do have that thing, and collectively, if a country has the conditioning that it has, so it can either embrace that and utilize that, or they can be a victim to that and feel like a victim. So have a massive victim identity as a collective country. And that's what I think countries are going through at the moment. They're going through this shift like punk. Like punk was going through that massive shift. I mean, it was culturally, Brian. It wasn't just kind of music. The fact that it meant that, what was I, 16? As a 16-year-old, I turned 16 in May 1977, and punk happened. And so it was like suddenly very possible to do that thing that I had just dreamt about, listening to the Tubes, White Punks on Dope, and Space Baby, all these songs that were blowing my mind, and David Bowie that had blown my mind up until that point, and the Queen, and then all these bands from America like Steely Dan that to me, Steely Dan sounded so complicated, but such a soundtrack of America. It sounded, and I just dreamt about actually seeing that country that made this music one day, because it was so intricately woven. I thought, how on earth is this made? When you listen to the Eagles, if you're living in the UK, you've been to the UK, I guess, yeah, you know what it's like. And so in the 70s, it was bleak. It was Dickensian almost. It was still suffering from the Second World War. There were still prefabs with bombed out areas. And so here, as a kid, and just thinking, music from America, and America had experienced the 50s, and we'd just seen it on TV during Happy Days and Astro, the cartoons, where we just thought in America, people just drove around on little spacecrafts between mid-century modern houses.
And the Jetsons.
Into diners, into diners and out of diners, it just and huge cars that look like spaceships, rockets, those designs on the back. I mean, there's one here at the flats where I live, and I think it's a Cadillac, a white Cadillac, and it's huge.
Yeah.
And and I know I've seen these cars when I've been over there, and I've seen them throughout my life, but to re-see them again and look at, because cars are shrunk. I mean, they're getting to be like generic boxes now.
They have boxes over there, but we're still, I mean, and this is a very American like gas guzzler thing, but people still love their giant trucks over here, which is actually very unfortunate. Which is an entirely different conversation.
Well, yeah, I mean that's MAGA, isn't it? That is right. Yeah, it is. Yeah, the pickup truck, which actually is here now. The pickup truck is here.
I apologize. Yeah.
Well, we've given each other's countries quite a few good and bad.
It's very funny when I was on the train from Zurich to Paris. I met a English company who's living in Paris now, and they apologized for the British culture of drinking that we inherited. Just not being able to just have one nice glass of wine with dinner.
Yeah, getting absolutely hammered.
Yeah,
I mean, in England especially, it's different in every part of England. Like, it's more social in Scotland. I mean, they can drink and drink and drink people under the table, and literally be the happiest people. I mean, it takes them a while to start fighting. Whereas in England, it's like they get hammered, they're fighting straight away, because all the suppressed anger that they've done through over smiling and being overly polite. you know.
Yeah, that's it. And I get the sense, and I think maybe you were alluding to this a bit too, that in a lot of ways, culturally, both there and here, because we're talking about punk here coming out of New York in the 70s, very like depressed city at the time. That punk was really a major cultural release valve.
Yeah, yes, and that's where they originate from, isn't it? They're like the wellspring of that of all the music. I mean, it starts with a. I mean, it started. I mean, it was probably anger, wasn't it? It was. I mean, it came through the UK's filtering system, so it came through Johnny Rotten and also Malcolm McLaren. Who was that person looking for. He was at the forefront of fashion, wasn't he? And how fashion
Managed the
and
Dolls
music
briefly before the
exactly.
Pistols. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think isn't it the fact that the actual wellspring of punk is New York? Is that a fact?
That's sort of, I think, the common belief. I mean, it's complicated because you could go back to the Stooges and the MC5, which is that's coming out of Detroit. But yeah, as far as like, I guess, tangible punk culture, people generally trace it back to like CBGB's. Richard Hell was the first person really kind of like ripping his shirt. But I do think in a lot of ways that really just what we've sort of come to define as punk, largely speaking, has been tremendously influenced by the early British bands.
Well, I suppose what the Brits are and still are, were good then and still are, is taking something and embellishing it.
Yeah.
Because of the small country thing. Like making it, like taking rock and roll and set like with the Beatles, and then selling it back to America with this kind of Liverpudlian humor, and that thing of they just did it so well. And the Beatles. Well, we all know the Beatles story. So, the fact that America embraced the Beatles so much and made them as huge, helped to make them as huge. And the fact that the Beatles wanted to be so huge in America as well is such a thing as well. Because, I mean, that was why they were so commercial, wasn't it? Because they had real American stars in their eyes, because they'd grown up with all the American music that had inspired them. So going back to America, to the heart of rock and roll, that have been their inspiration, and that's what it's been doing. It seems this symbiotic relationship that we have. But as I say, just the UK just being taking an American idea back to America.
Yeah, yeah, and sort of the genesis of this specific conversation was I would compare. It sounds like. Have you ever heard the phrase serial monogamist before in relationships? Somebody who like jumps from one long. So it sort of sounds like that was in a sense what you were sort of doing with the bands, that you were really just like starting one band after another.
It was one band, Brian. It was one band. I mean,
okay.
I literally
you said you were starting bands plural, but you meant it was one band that was sort of evolving over time.
Yeah, it's like I had this vision and I was starting bands. So I would start bands in a similar way to my brother starting bands when he was in a care home. Right to the last minute of his life, he was starting a band in the care home. And I'll probably be doing a similar thing. Well, if this interview went on long enough, we'd be in a band. First we'd be a duo, and then it would evolve probably, and they might evolve to 6, but I've learned to probably keep it at 4. So it's the thing of starting bands, and also not aspiring to be a solo artist. That's what it was. It was always bands, because bands were what I wanted to be in. And so I was starting bands as a kid. But then in 1977, it was like, I want to do this properly. I'd seen XTC, Talking Heads, all these bands that were so different to before. And I was going to go to art school. So for me, it was like art school pop art, Andy Warhol, and hearing like the Blank Generation, Richard Hell and the Voidoids, playing that over and over and thinking, where is this? Like, everything sounded so creative to me as a 16-year-old. It was like, this wasn't not the Eagles, this was not, I loved Hotel California, but I didn't relate to it in the same way I related to Blank Generation by Richard Hell and the Voidors or Devo. When I heard Devo and its Satisfaction, even though it was an old song that I knew, the way they screwed it up, wonked it around a bit and just like beaten it, taken it into an alleyway and completely like beaten it up, and then came back into the studio and went like, what about this? And presented it into this completely different, obscure way that I just was really resonating with me as a 16-year-old of wanting to get into art school, wanting to go up, going up to London every day, and then the family moving up to London. So in 77, I went and bought a guitar from Tin Pan Alley in London. So that was I'm starting bands properly now. This is it. And so that was my vision. And then from then on, it was one band because it was just Rob, my mate at work, and then it was Les, and then it was Graham, and then it was Blair, and it was Pat, and then it was Blair, and then it was Phil, and then it was Mark, and then it was like Heck 100. I mean, it was Heck 100 before with the Les Graham and I, but that was the week before we were Haircut 100, we were moving England. And then a week before that, we were Smacky Rober Dandy. It was like, we had a name every week.
We won't go far down the name conversation because it's been talked to death. But do you feel like it was, if you had been signed a week later, then the band's name would have been entirely different?
No, I don't think so. Because when we hit on that name, it was, do you just know when you hit on something that is really good and it suits? I mean, I think it would have.
The story that I heard is that it made you laugh, which is a very funny origin story. That it was kind of a silly name, right? I mean, that was part of the charm.
I think because there was between Les Graham and I, we were so living together as one. We were like three mates. We were one together as three. It's very odd to have. It's normally two mates, isn't it? That's what friends are when you're younger like that. But the fact that we came as three, and we felt like that. We felt very much a three-piece in that way. I mean, we didn't have a drummer, so we'd still rehearsed. We still stood there and imagined a drummer, and just still carried on rehearsing. But we were three friends, and humor was so a part of that. It was really, really important with us, as any kind of friendship is, isn't it? It's like, it seems that the reason that you're friends is because you're making each other laugh. So when it did make us laugh, and then it made a reaction of our other friends and acquaintances and strangers that we took the name to, the reaction kept going like, what? Haircut 100? And they would laugh sometimes, or they would say, why? And the reaction of why, for me, being into art pop, I just thought, perfect. I could see Paul McCartney with that question mark holding up just like the question mark in, I think it's I don't know whether it's from How We Won it couldn't have been How We Won the War. It would have been Magical Mystery Tour, probably, when he's dressed as a sort of army officer and he's sitting at a desk and he's just holding up a question mark. And I'd be scouring sort of books on the Beatles because I was developing as a late Beatles fan. I got into them late because I wouldn't have got into them when I was younger, even though I heard them and they were everywhere in the UK. I mean, they were like Beatles, they were just literally everywhere. And then during punk, I wouldn't have got into the Beatles. Nobody was into the Beatles during punk.
It was just like markedly uncool to be into the Beatles at the time. Yeah.
Strange to imagine, but it was, and crazy that then you'd get a band from Manchester many years later and they would embrace the Beatles.
So backing up a second, you had said that I think you were saying that you wanted to be a graphic artist at a certain point, but that was your professional ambition at that point. But then it sounds like the band thing just completely took over your life.
It did. I did I was a commercial artist from 77 all the way up to 1981.
So you were doing it at a really young age.
Yeah, I didn't get into art college, and I would have needed to go back to school. And by that time, I didn't live anywhere near school. The family had moved away, so it was almost impossible to go to school. So I got a sort of art O level and that kind of thing, but I would have needed to go back and do English, maths, and physics, and God knows what, or go to. Yes, I needed to do them somewhere. These qualifications, and I got a job up in commercial art in the West End, where punk was kicking off, right in the heart, the epicenter of punk, like almost down the next street from Sniffing Glue magazine. You know, I was there. I was right there, and so taking that job was the best decision I made around that time. You know, and it was my girlfriend that got me the job. So,
I think it was a relatively recent interview that you and I think Les did around this new release, and you were discussing a song in the early days, and he said that especially with the first single, that you were really just trying all different kinds of genres, and I think he said kind of jumping on different, I guess, bandwagons at the time. Obviously, there were a lot of subcultures happening. Yeah. Like there was, the specials, there was ska happening at the time, things running in parallel. But part of your journey was really sort of experimenting with different styles as well.
Well, I think that's Les's view. Negative. He has a negative view. We're positive and negative. That's our relationship, and it works in that way. So Les would be, we jumped on bandwagons. Mine would be, we're developing as a band, and we're developing our styles, and we're getting better at this, and we're just cultivating and finding our feet, and also reflecting back the culture of that period. Because if we'd have been doing funk in 1977, it would have been an odd choice. So if and it was right from the word go. In 1977, when I kind of got stars in my eyes looking at XTC on stage as a Croydon Greyhound, and I just went like, there was a moment in Neon Shuffle. It's like, oh yeah, and Les had that vision when he saw the Small Faces at I think it was like Louis Shimodian. You have that moment when you go like, oh yeah, so you follow that, and then. But, being adaptable, because you want to be on that stage. So if you think that you're just, being derivative of XTC is going to get you on that stage, that's not correct. But you don't know that when you're younger, because you're just replicating what you see, because you haven't got the musical ability either. You're just a fan of the time. And you just think, I'd love to do that. But, I know we weren't good enough. We weren't good enough in 77, 78, 79, 80. But there was something that started to hit around about getting from 19 into 20 and 21. And it's that moment almost. I read an interview with the band is Fleet Foxes. And they said at first they were just like, they just sounded quite derivative of two things. I think it was the Beach Boys and Elliott Smith. And they just were really happy with that, and they were being it. But at one point they felt like, but what is the Fleet Foxes? What are we? What do we have to offer the evolution of that's going on right now? The fact that XTC were XTC, there was no other bands like XTC. And there's a few groups of art pop kind of bands, but they developed from the Helium Kids beforehand into XTC. They have that moment. So that's what it was. It was just evolving, and at that particular point, evolving from Moving England, which was more kind of like we're going through a bit of a monochrome setty stroke. The XTC and all the stars that we liked were developing. I mean, our drummer Rob, he was getting more into Joy Division and the pop group, So he left at that particular point, and not with any kind of, we're still really good mates, but it was just that you follow what you love, and and your love and what you love evolves and changes. Yes, I loved XTC. Yes, I loved Talking Heads, but I've never been somebody that stays that one thing. I'm growing in my tastes, in my taste buds. I can, alongside the Ruts, Babylon's Burning was Boogie Wonderland by Earth, Wind and Fire, and I loved both. So, I suppose you call it guilty pleasures now, but I didn't feel guilty.
I don't think anybody would call either the Ruts or Earth, Wind and Fire guilty pleasures. I mean, those are right. Would they? I don't know. Maybe over there, but
no, they
Earth,
wouldn't.
Wind and Fire is like, yeah,
they definitely, yes, they definitely wouldn't. No, but people call it like at that particular time. If you'd have been into the Ruts, which we all were, you wouldn't have said I'm into Earth, Wind and Fire, because punk was happening still, and you wouldn't have said, oh, Boogie Wonderland, even though we would have all been at the club dancing to Boogie Wonderland and then going back to our rooms and hearing Babylon's Burning, because that was the thing that was happening. So that's why it's a sort of like guilty pleasure. But I remember at the time they ran alongside each other. Sort of Haircuts record was Odyssey, Back to My Roots, because of the guitar and how it happened. And around that time you had the Associates going. So, we would love Logan Time by the Associates, the Affectionate Punch album, and then put on Odyssey at the same time. So they ran alongside each other. So, but you probably didn't. This is why the evolution of music was changing. The culture was changing. It was getting more dance, and it was leaving the Echo and the Bunnymen stage. And Echo and the Bunnymen knew it. Haircut had that stage, and then it was turning into something else. We all know that. And as somebody in music, the reason why probably Les called it a bandwagon, that's his view. You could call it like a wagon of say like pioneers in America. They were looking for something new, weren't they? Or a new start. Somebody going along and starting something new, a new sound. You're going from it's evolving one sound, and you're leaving that, and it's turning into something else. And when you see that in sort of music, you go, well, we will have our time for sure. You go along and you have your time, but it looks like, say, like the Ruts came when everybody, Bee Gees, even Beatles, everybody comes and goes. It's a thing that happens. You either get a moment, tiny little moment, or a bit longer, or you don't know how long you're going to have when you first start. I mean, we just thought just getting a singles deal with Arista Records was the most amazing thing. Would it go beyond that? I mean, you hope, but you're not actually planning for it, aren't you? You're not saying, oh, well, it's going to turn into an albums deal and that album is going to go platinum, and then, but let's split up for 44 years. I mean, that's not part of the plan.
That was in the master plan. Yeah. So you did what white rock musicians have done since the beginning of rock, which is look to Black culture, look to reggae, look to funk, and use that as sort of a way to sort of expand beyond. And that really is a sort of, I think, the story of certainly the evolution of UK punk, like Joe Strummer, right? He's like the best example of this. Somebody like really, he was coming out to the States a lot. He was going down to Jamaica a lot, and really sort of like moving into new sounds. Did you find that? But you found that in spite of these, I guess, artificial barriers, that people were still quick to embrace something a little bit different.
Yeah, well, having grown through punk and that being an influence, the fact that the Clash did embrace, they lived in Notting Hill. They were embracing it. They were living amongst it, as I had done when I was growing up and going to Brixton Market because we lived in around that area. So I have vivid memories of going to Brixton Market and hearing ska, the Trojan records playing down the market. You're walking down the street and you're like, what is sound? This sound doesn't sound like school. It doesn't sound like it sounds new. It's like the sound of a completely different culture. And because you're a sponge and you're young and you just take everything in, you don't have barriers when you're young. You're just influencing and absorbing everything. That's what I was. I was just absorbing the whole caboodle, and I'm just assuming that humans, that's how we learn and that's why we evolve, and we're just taking it all in. I think it's only developing later on. Some people just have these kind of dogmas and they have these rules and they have, I'm not going to absorb this. I don't like this.
Prejudices aren't born into people. People aren't born prejudiced. No. Like they have to be kind of, culturally.
Yeah, it has to be conditioned, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so, I had a family that loved jazz, and I've got a long list of records that would be around my dad's, he took me to see Count Basie, Ray Charles and Oscar Peterson. So, there was black culture was right there, right from the off with me in 71. I think that was about. So,
wait, was it it was the three of them in one show?
On one bill at Hammersmith Odeon.
God.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
How lucky was I to get to have a father that was into jazz and took his son to a concert like that.
The two giants of jazz, and then I loved Ray Charles's jazz output. I think it's underrated. The stuff he was doing with like Milt Jackson, those albums I think are wonderful. But anyway, sorry, bit of an aside. That's incredible.
Well, I got all that authenticity. I heard it as a young kid, and impressionable. It wasn't like too young. I was probably about 10 or 11. So I'm hearing how different American musicians sound, to the other musicians that I heard. Because, Dad we were just going to see jazz, and we did as a family throughout the next 10 years. It was just going to jazz gigs, because my parents were jazz nuts. So,
So were they supportive when you picked up a guitar and decided that was something that you wanted to pursue?
They were supportive of both my brother and I. Yeah. Music was part of the family for sure. It was music was more than other cultures. We weren't an intellectual family at all. There was it was music. It was music and the television.
Well, jazz is an intellectual music, so at least you've got that.
I guess. But my father was pretty anti-intellectual, it seems.
Yeah.
He just, I think, just through, I could go into detail, because I've had lots. I grew up and then like look back and thought, you've got both your parents' upbringing to kind of, because you don't know them, do you? You don't really know them. They're your parents. So you know their story, but you don't know them.
I don't want to bring it down too much, but I lost my father last month, and part of
sorry to hear that. Yeah,
but part of my, a big part of my relationship with him. First, it was baseball, but then it became music, and it was really, I was able to fly back home. He had Parkinson's. I was able to fly back home. We knew it was the end.
Yeah.
And I said, we're going to I need to get you out of the house, right? I need to get you out of the house. You need to drive around. You've just been cooped up in this house. And the real reason why I want to do that is because I just put together a playlist of his music, because I don't think that he had really been engaging much with music in his final days. And to me, it was like such a key to our relationship. And I think it was an important part of his identity too. And it was something that now that I look back on who he was and what our relationship was and how he influenced me, that was a really big piece of it. Just taking me to shows.
Yeah. I mean, and aren't you lucky? to have that. He's left that with you, and it obviously was really important to him to do that. He could have not done that and kept it separate. And isn't it brilliant that they didn't keep it separate and that they wanted to share their love of music with their family? It's almost like they can't communicate sometimes through long, deep conversations about life that you wanted. You wanted the kind of the guru father that was wise and would sit there for hours and we got lots of figures on TV like that here when I was growing up, like this guy called Jack Hargreaves who would sit and talk about fishing and all the things you wanted to know as a kid, that your dad wasn't really into because, if you can imagine jazz in this country goes with drinking pints of bitter, at the pub. It was like you go to the pub and listen to jazz. So I spent a lot of time in pubs in the garden with a Coke and a straw, just playing. And I'm glad of that because it meant that I could escape into another, make up a sort of world where I had 3 hours to spend while Dad was in the pub. So I'm glad of that. That time is valuable now. Yes, I didn't get to know my dad. I wasn't in the pub because you were not old enough to be in the pub with him and his mates doing that, and that's why I think my dad's friends probably knew my dad a lot more than I did.
You were talking about this a little bit before about how depressed England was, obviously, after the bombing campaigns of World War II, and that was, he lived through that. I obviously, it's a big part of masculine culture to be sort of to stoic, but I have to imagine that is hugely exacerbated to have survived something like that, and to wasn't Churchill's whole thing stiff upper lip and
when you're going through hell to keep going.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like the knights who say knee, that Monty Python sketch where it's like. And that was very much the British spirit. That again, it's that thing of small country, has to fight on somehow. It's like, well, you can't cut my legs off because I haven't got any legs. Come on then, So I think that spirit is definitely that tenacity. I think that Churchill had, and that is. I think it's innate, but also runs along the suppressed anger and the politeness and all the other things that the culture has. I didn't grow up with a sense of it's hard because, Brian, you've got different sets because you've got the class system, you've got a sense of entitlement from a certain class. And then the other class the working class has not got a sense of entitlement, unless it's just down to the personality. You get lots of cockneys with a sense of entitlement, I can tell you. But generally, which I know is the mother of all fuck-ups, but generally, that assumption, there seems to be sort of clear, conditioned, it's almost like duality of a country, but, in the class that I grew up with, I would probably be a foot soldier. I'd have to go in the trenches, and you kind of know your place in that way. I was reading Roald Dahl's Boy not so long ago. When I should have been reading that as a kid. I'm sort of reading up on all the books I didn't read as a kid because we weren't a reading family. So.
Fortunately, Roald Dahl is something you can also, I think, experience pretty fully as an adult. Yeah.
And I fancied knowing about him because, it was just interesting. I didn't really know too much about him. I thought, well, I'm getting Matilda and I'm getting all these, the Pelican, I want all these stories.
Yeah.
But what was he like? So I found it fascinating with his life. But I forget what I was going to say now. But it was along the lines of the kind of the culture that he grew up with and the public school that he went to, and the completely different upbringing that he had compared to the upbringing that I'd experienced. And when that was it. When the war happened, he found himself as an officer immediately. because he'd gone to public school. And, you know, where he's found himself as an officer, somebody like my dad would have found himself as he did in the Irish Fusiliers, which is like he was just a private straight away. You know your place because, yeah.
Something I want to be mindful of your time. I know you have interviews back to back, so I'm going to skip through time a little bit, but I do think that this is related, and I do think that this is important to talk about. You've since talked about leaving the band, and I get the sense that in later conversations you've gotten into a little bit more depth about that I think it was just a difficult time, and it strikes me that I think maybe prior to your leaving the bands that you were already dealing with the pressures of success. Is that fair to say that a lot of that sort of stress and depression and everything else was coming with like how quickly things took off?
For sure. I mean, a holiday as simple. That's why I was having holidays. I was trying to take time off to be able to navigate the work. I mean, I don't think I'd worked as hard. I hadn't done as much stuff in life as that. Suddenly you go from working in London, taking parcels around, delivering parcels, going with a cab and walking around, and doing some artwork and then popping home and, going out on the weekend maybe. And, you're looking for girlfriends and, it's just simple stuff like that. And then for the flat out for a whole year, the intensity of work and what happened and a complete life 360 and change where, yes, you've dreamt of this. Yes, you've wanted this completely. We all had. But when it actually happens, it's like anything, any fantasy. It's not as good as or it's not as good. It's just not the reality. Simple as that. I do it now. I just think, wouldn't it be amazing to be Eckhart Tolle or George Clooney? What an amazing life, to just amble around from one lake, an amazing house, to this getting kind of clapped as you go from one beautifully designed motor launch in south of France. You think that life would be amazing. I'm not talking about Eckhart, by the way. Here, it's.
To be fair, like I'm sure he has his problems, but that probably is actually a pretty good life. I would imagine.
Yeah. But it's that thing of when it does happen and you're on top of the pops and then you're flying to America and then you're in a limousine and you're having that. It's got a different set of like Les trying to open the ice bucket and it banged it and it hit his face and he was like really upset and angry. And it's like, we laughed because later, not at the time, but later because it was an example of a tiny new thing that was so upsetting, but it was not. If you'd have said, go back to our bedrooms and you're not going to want to do it because the ice bucket might not open properly and it might bang your lip and you might just want to not do this anymore. Tiny things.
Yeah, you have put it in a way.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
I think we're a bit out of time here.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
okay.
Okay. Another interview in 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. So yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Okay.
I guess we'll end on this, but I just want to say that I think you put it really well, and this is something that I've been trying to kind of qualify in my life is that. When we think about our future and when we think about the directions that we're going in, we can only think obviously in like broad abstractions, and we just don't we don't account for the little tiny things that make up life. And of course, in every good thing, there's going to be all of these little bad and ups and downs.
Yeah, there is, and there's also you don't think about physical well-being, and especially when you're younger. I didn't think about what I need to eat. This was 1982. You didn't think about, there wasn't nobody even knew what the word depression meant, or stress or overwork or, so when I took a holiday, my mates just hated me. instead of like going, you need a holiday, mate.
Let's strike while the iron hot, which is an impulse I think you can also appreciate is like, this is happening right now. This is not going to happen forever. Like, let's keep this going.
Yeah. But, when you do have something where you are not yourself anymore, you feel as though, because the stress is kind of, you've hit this kind of level, this new level, and it's you're not breaking through it, because you see almost like stuck. And you just want to be how you felt earlier, as light as you felt earlier. You'll do anything, and if it means just kind of walking around the park for the next 2 weeks, that's what you will do, because you'll walk forever as long as you know that you'll get back to being that, having the optimistic outlook that you once had, only a month ago or something, or maybe even the previous day. So then that's what. When sometimes people walk into doctors and they're at the end of their tether and it's taken their life to get to this stage, and they want a pill or some kind of help to just like stop it. And the doctor just probably needs to say, go for a walk, drink more water, eat better, go to the gym, do some, come back in a month and then see if you're in the same place. It's probably not what somebody wants to hear. And it's probably not what most doctors see. I mean, I know that it's changing, but it's what most doctors aren't actually prescribing. They're saying, here's some Prozac or whatever it is that the new magical solution is.
But it's clear to me that when you reflect back on the time, it's clear to you that you made the right decision at the time for you.
Well, I've never made a good decision under stress so it's probably not, you don't make great decisions, but you have to deal with them once you've made them, and change has happened. And like there's lots of decisions when you get older that you go, well, that wasn't my best at all. But you've made them, so you have to adjust with them and do them. And that's what the kind of resolution and kind of atonement is of this of boxing the compass. That's what it is about, because it is 44 years adrift, and now it's actually a thing, and there's an actual album. There's a tangible thing that is saying, yes, it has been that, but now it's this. So we did what we did, but we're going to do it differently, because we haven't got a chance to go back, and we've lost those 44 years of the whole career that Depeche Mode and Duran Duran would have done. They are gone forever. But you only have the present moment.